The chandeliers of Manhattan Crown shimmered like captive constellations, scattering their glow across marble floors and tables dressed in ivory linen. This was not merely a restaurant, but the curated illusion of a world untouched by imperfection. Every detail, soft jazz lilting from a grand piano, servers gliding like dancers, crystal glasses trembling with anticipation of vintage Bordeaux, whispered of wealth, exclusivity, and power. And into this illusion stepped Parker Martinez. At 42, Parker was not only a billionaire real estate magnate. He was the architect of New York's skyline. Entire towers bore his vision, glass giants that gleamed against the night sky. Yet, as he passed through the revolving doors of Manhattan Crown, it wasn't his empire that preceded him, but the gravity of his presence. He wore a tailored navy suit that molded perfectly to his broad frame, silver cufflinks, catching and reflecting the chandelier light with every subtle flick of his wrist. His hair, dark but streaked with distinguished silver, was swept back meticulously. His jawline remained strong, softened slightly by exhaustion, the kind that money could never erase. "Good evening," Mr. Martinez said, Michael the maitre d' bowing slightly, his voice tinged with reverence. Parker gave a practiced smile. "Good evening, Michael. Your usual table is ready, sir. Shall I have them open the Chateau Margaux, 1985? For a moment, Parker hesitated. Usually, the vintage was a ritual, an unspoken confirmation of his belonging in this world of excess. But tonight, something in him resisted. "No," he said finally, "just a bottle of still water. My guest may join me later." Michael inclined his head. "Of course, sir." As Parker followed him toward the discreet table nestled in the farthest corner, overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline, he passed a dozen snippets of power. Bankers murmuring about mergers, senators whispering over foie gras, influencers air-kissing with practiced laughter. These were his people. This was his arena. And yet, when he sat down, something shifted. The grandeur no longer comforted him. Instead, it felt distant, like a joke told in another language. He adjusted his cufflinks, a nervous habit from his boardroom days, a tell whenever his thoughts threatened to spiral. His phone buzzed. A message from Sabrina. Running 10 minutes late. The board meeting went long. "You'll love my new red dress." He typed back with dutiful precision. "Looking forward to it." But as he set the phone down, his eyes drifted. Something was off. The laughter, the music, the ritual of clinking glasses suddenly felt muted, as though the evening were happening behind glass. And then it struck him. A scent. A faint hint of cinnamon blended with warm vanilla. It wasn't from the kitchen. Manhattan Crown prided itself on imported truffle oil and aged caviar, not the sweetness of homemade spice. No, this was personal, familiar, a fragrance once woven into the very fabric of his life. Parker froze. His pulse stumbled. It was her scent. Everly Brown. The name hit him like the first note of a song half remembered. For months, no, for years, he'd told himself he had buried her, that their divorce had been the conclusion, full stop. That life with Sabrina, elegant and seamless, was what he needed. But memory, cruel and stubborn, lived under his skin. They had loved deeply and fought harder. For 8 years, their lives had been tethered his skyscrapers, her art, their laughter echoing through a Brooklyn brownstone that had once smelled perpetually of burnt toast and vanilla candles. Until the silence came, until his mother's disdain, until his cowardice to defend her, until words like "you're holding me back" fractured everything beyond repair. And now, the sound of a tray being set down nearby broke his thoughts. A voice followed. Warm, low, polite. It couldn't be. He turned his head slightly. Not enough to appear obvious, but just enough to steal a glance. And there she was. Everly. She moved with practiced grace, balancing a tray with 3 wine glasses and a bottle of red house wine. Her black uniform was simple, hugging her figure more tightly than it once might have stretched gently across her rounded abdomen. Pregnant. At least 7 months, Parker guessed. The world tilted beneath him. His throat tightened, and in his chest his heart hammered an impossible rhythm. 7 months. He began counting backward. The divorce had been finalized 8 months ago, but in truth, they had still been entangled signing papers, dividing assets, falling into each other's arms, when anger cracked into longing. Could it be? Could this child be his? He reached for his glass of water, but his hand trembled. He didn't drink. He didn't move. He could only watch frozen as the woman he had once promised forever glided past her hand, briefly pressing against the small of her back, her shoulders carrying the fatigue of late nights and heavy secrets. Everly did not look at him. Or perhaps she did from the corner of her eye and chose not to. Her professionalism was flawless. Her tray did not waver. But Parker saw everything. The faint shadows beneath her eyes. The way her steps carried both pride and weariness. The quiet resilience that no uniform could disguise. She was here. She was pregnant. And she was a stranger. The phone buzzed again, Sabrina's name flashing across the screen. He didn't answer. He couldn't, not with his past standing 10 feet away, carrying what might be his future. In that instant, Parker Martinez, the man who had bent Manhattan's skyline to his will, who had walked into every room with power coursing through his veins, realized he had a choice. He could pretend, look away, leave Everly in the shadows where he had banished her, or he could rise, walk toward her, face the woman he had abandoned, and face himself. The clock on the wall chimed softly, its sound nearly lost amid the jazz and murmurs of the dining room. But to Parker, it was deafening. A reckoning had arrived. This was not just another dinner, not another deal, not another carefully choreographed night of opulence. This was the collision of past and present, and perhaps, just perhaps, the opening of something fate had never fully allowed to close. Thank you for stepping into Parker and Everly's world with me, if you've read this far. Their journey begins one of love, regret, redemption, and choices that can change everything. What do you think Parker should do next? Should he walk away, or stand up and face the woman he once loved? The woman carrying a child who might be his. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. If this story stirred something in you, don't forget to like this video so more hearts can find it, and follow the channel to continue this journey. Trust me, what comes next will leave you breathless. The dining room of Manhattan Crown shimmered with a kind of beauty that belonged to someone else's life. For most guests, it was an escape into perfection. Crystal glasses catching golden light, a pianist weaving jazz notes like silk, the hum of wealth filling every corner. For Everly Brown, it was work, nothing more, nothing less. She moved between tables with the poise of someone who had learned to mask exhaustion with grace. Her uniform of fitted black blouse and apron had been altered twice already to accommodate the swell of her belly, and still tonight it pulled a little tighter than before. The buttons strained faintly when she bent forward, the fabric stretching, as though reminding her how much had changed. Her lower back ached, a steady throb that pulsed with each step. She shifted her weight subtly, careful not to limp. Her smile was faint, but practiced, inviting tips from affluent strangers without revealing anything real. And from the corner of her eye, she saw him. She knew the shape of his shoulders before her gaze confirmed it. That tilt of his head, as he leaned over his phone, the faint curl at the edge of his mouth when he was half thinking, half hiding, the way his hand tapped just once against the rim of a water glass, a habit he had never broken. Parker Martinez. Her heart stumbled, then steadied again with force. Of all the nights, of all the places, of all the tables in New York City, he was here. She forced her breath into rhythm, willing her face to remain calm. She delivered the tray in her hands to table 12, murmured polite thanks, and turned away. She did not let her eyes linger. She did not falter. But inside, the ground shifted. It had been 8 months since the papers were signed, but the unraveling of their marriage had begun long before. Still, no matter how she tried to cut him out of her life, Parker lived in the fragile spaces between her thoughts, in the memory of laughter spilling through their Brooklyn brownstone kitchen at 2 a.m., in the way he used to press a kiss to her collarbone when she fell asleep on the couch, in the quiet warmth of orchids delivered after she lost a big pitch, and in the words that had broken her. "You're holding me back." Everly tightened her grip on the empty tray until her knuckles whitened, then relaxed it again. No trembling, no weakness. She had promised herself long ago that if she ever saw him again, she would be a fortress, stone walls around every wound unshakable. But pregnancy was treacherous. Hormones turned even the strongest walls into glass. Fatigue carved its name into her bones. And now, one glance from the man who had once sworn forever was enough to stir every fracture inside her. She retreated to the service station, where rows of spotless glasses lined the shelves. She lifted a rag and began polishing one, though it didn't need it. The familiar rhythm steadied her hands. Still, she felt his gaze. Not the dismissive glance of a man accustomed to seeing servers fade into the background, but something sharper. Recognition. Regret. It was dangerous. Everly risked another glance. Parker had not changed much, still tall, still striking in that old money effortless way. The navy suit, the polished shoes, the air of command that followed him like a second skin. But there was something different too. A restlessness in his eyes, a heaviness around his mouth. As though success had soured, he sat in the glow of chandeliers, yet felt entirely in the dark. She had known this moment might come. New York was large, but it was not infinite. Parker Martinez lived at its center, and she unwillingly orbited the same city. Each night, she walked into Manhattan Crown, some part of her braced for it for him. And yet, facing the reality now, she felt smaller than she had ever imagined. Did he know? Did he realize the child she carried might be his? Her hand drifted instinctively to her belly, resting there briefly before she caught herself and dropped it again. She had tried to tell him. Emails, voicemails, desperate attempts filtered and ignored. His assistant Sarah had deflected every call with polite precision. Once the ink dried on their divorce papers, Everly Brown had ceased to exist. And yet here she was, 7 months pregnant, working doubles to cover rent in a 1-bedroom apartment in Harlem, with thin walls and a heater that moaned in protest whenever the wind turned sharp. The Everly of a year ago would never have recognized this woman, tired, swollen ankles balancing trays for the wealthy instead of pitches for Fortune 500 companies. But the Everly of today did not regret it. She had lost Parker, yes. She had lost her job, her safety net, the life she thought was secure. But she had not lost herself. Not completely. She smoothed the hand over her belly again, softer this time, protective. The baby stirred a gentle kick beneath her palm. She whispered under her breath, too low for anyone else to hear. "It's all right, little one. We're doing just fine." And she meant it. Mostly. Except seeing Parker again, cracked open something she thought she had buried. The part of her heart still remembered dancing barefoot in their kitchen music, humming from an old speaker and cheap wine staining both lips, the nights when his laughter had been her favorite song. But then there were the other memories, the long evenings waiting by the window, while Parker lingered at galas, his mother whispering poison into his ear. How Margot Martinez looked through her made it seem like Everly was invisible, ordinary, and unworthy. The silence Parker offered instead of defense. The moment he walked out, leaving her to collapse in the rain, mascara running like ink. She tightened her jaw. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Lifting her tray again, she moved toward the following table dangerously close to where Parker sat. She felt him before she saw him, his presence, his stillness in a room otherwise alive with motion. And then, inevitably, their eyes met. Only for a second, maybe two. But it was enough. The clink of glasses, the murmur of laughter, the notes from the piano, all of it receded, leaving a silence that pressed against her ribs. Parker's eyes widened slightly, as though he had seen a ghost. Everly's chest constricted, but she forced herself to look away first. Not rudely, simply with purpose. She could not afford this. Not here. Not now. Turning sharply, she slipped back into the kitchen, pushing through the swinging doors. The sudden change in air, the scent of garlic, rosemary, and detergent hit her like a wall. She leaned against the counter, her tray pressed to her chest, fighting for composure. "Everything all right, sugar?" The voice belonged to Betty, the morning shift waitress. Gray hair pinned into a bun, eyes sharp but kind. Everly nodded. Just tired. Betty's gaze lingered, but she didn't press. 5 more hours. Then home. Everly managed a faint smile. Home. If the word felt fragile, she didn't admit it. Home was not the brownstone she once shared with Parker. It was a creaky apartment where she slept beside peeling paint and dreams that had been stripped bare. But it was hers. Hers and the child's. And she would not let Parker or anyone take that away. Not with apologies. Not with regrets. Not unless he meant every word. When she returned to the floor, her smile was back, gentle, professional, untouchable. Parker Martinez watched her from across the room, his eyes unreadable. And Everly Brown gave him nothing. Not yet. The restaurant was alive around him. Wine poured laughter, floated silver cutlery, whispered against porcelain. But Parker Martinez heard none. His gaze was fixed on the woman who had once been his everything, now moving like a shadow across the polished marble. Everly. Her name pulsed through him with every beat of his heart, each syllable a reminder of what he had lost and might never reclaim. He told himself to look away and let her slip into the periphery the way he once allowed his assistant to filter her calls, messages, and pleas. But he couldn't. His hand reached for his phone, as though compelled by something primal. The screen lit up Sabrina's name, flashing with another unanswered call. He silenced it with a swipe, then almost without thought scrolled back through his inbox. Months of contracts, bids, negotiations. Evidence of his empire's endless hunger blurred past his eyes. He scrolled further. Down. Past deadlines. Past congratulatory notes from board members. Past sterile messages from his mother. And then he saw them. Unread. The subject lines were simple. Luis, I need a moment. Please read this, it matters. Important. Not Luis. Parker corrected the thought automatically. He hadn't been Luis for years. He had shed that name with his childhood, when his family reinvented themselves for the marble foyers of New York. But Everly had known him as Luis, sometimes in private, in the intimacy of their kitchen at midnight. It was a name spoken with love, with exasperation, with belonging. His breath stilled. His thumb hovered. Finally, he tapped the last one. The words glared at him in stark black against a white screen. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I'm pregnant. It's yours. You should know. Dated 7 months ago. Parker stared at the message until the edges of his vision blurred. He remembered exactly where he had been that day, standing in a penthouse boardroom on Fifth Avenue, pitching a new skyscraper to investors flown in from Dubai. Sabrina had been beside him in her scarlet power suit, a glass of champagne in hand. The applause of men in tailored suits had drowned out everything. And at that moment, as Everly pressed send from some quiet corner of her unraveling life, he was raising a toast to himself. A laugh escaped him, sharp and bitter. Not amusement. Horror. He had missed it and missed her words. Missed the truth. Missed the chance to show up. He pressed his thumb against the bridge of his nose, willing away the tight knot forming there. His reflection in the darkened window stared back at him. A man in a perfect suit, in an ideal restaurant, with an ideal life. Hollow. Everly walked past again, tray balanced with careful grace. Her uniform clung to her swollen belly. She didn't look at him, and for the first time in years, Parker understood what abandonment looked like, not when someone leaves you, but when you leave them. He had left her to face this alone. He scrolled further, opening the other unread messages, like a man peeling bandages from wounds long left to fester. Please call me back. Just once. I don't want anything from you, only honesty. She's due in 4 months. You should know. His chest constricted. She. The baby was a girl. He thought of Everly's grandmother, the woman she spoke of often, who raised 3 children on grit and gospel songs. A woman Everly idolized, whose strength she carried like an inheritance. Would she name the baby after her? His thumb lingered over the screen. He wanted to write something, anything, to reply after all these months, to say he was sorry that he had been blind, that he had built towers while she built life. But what word could bridge the gulf he had created? None. Parker set the phone down, his hand trembling against the linen. He looked across the room. Everly was bent slightly at the service station, scribbling a note on a ticket. Her braids slipped over one shoulder. The lines of weariness around her eyes were sharper than he remembered. She looked smaller somehow, not because she had diminished, but because life had pressed her into corners she was never meant to fit. And yet, she still carried herself like light. It undid him. The maitre d' approached quietly, clearing his throat. Mr. Martinez, is everything all right? Parker forced his voice steady. The server at table 9, what's her name? Michael hesitated. Sir, we don't usually... Parker slipped a discreet bill across the podium. Not arrogance. Desperation. Michael exhaled. Everly Brown. The confirmation hit like a blow. Parker nodded once, his voice low. I need to speak with her. She's on shift until midnight. Breaks in 3 hours. 3 hours. He had negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts in less time. He had closed deals that altered city skylines before dessert was served. But this was different. I'll wait, he said. Michael raised his brows, almost surprised. That's unusual. Parker managed a hollow smile. It's necessary. He returned to his corner table, but the empire around him no longer mattered. The soft jazz, the flicker of candlelight, the murmurs of wealth, they blurred into insignificance. The only reality in the room was Everly. He watched her move with quiet resilience, noting every time she touched her back, every subtle shift of her weight, every protective gesture toward the life within her. He imagined her sitting in sterile waiting rooms alone, flipping through outdated magazines, while hearing the baby's heartbeat without him. He imagined her crying silently at night, too proud to ask for help. And it gutted him. His glass of burgundy sat untouched, its warmth growing stale. Parker Martinez understood the weight of waiting, and not waiting for a deal for the first time. Not for applause, but for the chance to earn a conversation. Minutes stretched into hours. He remembered the first time he met her on stage at a conference in Harlem, pitching a branding campaign with fire in her voice. She had captivated the room, but it wasn't her ideas that held him. It was her courage. He had stumbled through an introduction afterwards complimenting her slides. She had rolled her eyes and said, "Try harder, Martinez." And he had. For months he had pursued her, learning to stay up till dawn in conversations that stripped him bare, learning to dance in kitchens, to love without calculation. Until the world interfered. Until his silence cost them everything. Parker's fingers drummed against the edge of his napkin. The weight of silence was different now. It wasn't a shield. It was abandonment. And it carried a name. Everly. And a child. The restaurant ticked on like clockwork, but Parker remained anchored in that corner, a billionaire powerless for once. He checked the time. 11:45. 15 minutes left. Everly stood by the bar, reciting a cocktail order to the bartender. She laughed faintly at something, a polite laugh, not real, and placed her hand over her belly again. Parker exhaled as though steadying himself for battle. In 15 minutes, the reckoning would begin. And this time, he would not walk away. The clock struck midnight with a soft chime that most diners never noticed. But Parker Martinez heard it as though it were a starting gun. He had been waiting 3 hours, and every tick had deepened the weight in his chest. Across the room, Everly removed her apron and placed it behind the bar. She murmured something to the bartender, who nodded toward the service hallway. Her shift was only half done, but the brief reprieve was hers, a stolen 20 minutes before she returned to the floor. Parker stood. No hesitation. Not this time. The maitre d' raised an eyebrow, but Parker didn't pause for permission. He followed Everly into the narrow corridor, lined with crates of wine, where the dining room din dimmed into silence. A faint hum of refrigeration units filled the air, cold and steady, like the drum of his guilt. Everly was leaning against the wall, her hand pressed lightly against her lower back. She closed her eyes, momentarily exhaling, as though savoring the quiet, and then she felt him. Her lids fluttered open, and their eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The years, the silence, the fracture between them stretched like a taut string ready to snap. Everly straightened her posture, defensive yet graceful. "What are you doing back here?" Parker's throat tightened. He had rehearsed words in his head. Apologies, explanations, please, but in the presence of her gaze they all crumbled. "I needed to see you." Her laugh was sharp without warmth. "You've seen me. Now go." He stepped closer, careful as though nearing the edge of a cliff. "Everly, no." Her voice cut calm and controlled. "You don't get to say my name like that. Not anymore." Parker flinched. "I deserve that. But I read your messages tonight." Her body went still. 7 months ago, he continued, his voice lower, heavier. "You tried to tell me. About the baby. About everything. I didn't see them until now." Everly's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. "And what? Now you want credit for finally opening your inbox." His jaw clenched. He forced the words through anyway. "I didn't ignore you on purpose. My assistant." "Don't," she interrupted, her eyes flashing. "Don't you dare blame this on an assistant. You let me fall through the cracks of your life. And you were okay with it." The silence after her words was brutal. Parker's chest ached, the truth slicing sharper than her anger. "I wasn't fine," he said at last, his voice rough. "I was blind." I let everything else business my mother expectations matter more than you. And I was wrong. Everly crossed her arms, her hand grazing the swell of her belly. You think wrong is enough? What have these months been like? Alone in a doctor's office. Alone at night. Alone while you were out building skyscrapers. He swallowed hard. That's why I'm here now. I don't want you alone anymore. I want money. The word was spat like venom. That's what you came to offer. A check to soothe your conscience. To make sure your name isn't smeared in the papers when the world finds out you left your ex-wife pregnant and working doubles. The accusation landed because it wasn't far from the truth. His family would demand damage control. His board would demand discretion. But Parker wasn't here for them. He stepped closer, his voice low, almost pleading. I don't want to repurchase my way, Everly. I want to be here. For you. For her. Her hand pressed against her belly instinctively at the pronoun. He noticed. Everly's lips parted, a flicker of emotion crossing her face before she shuddered it again. You don't get to decide that now. You don't get to drop in and out when it's convenient. I'm not leaving, Parker said firmly. Her eyes narrowed. You said that once before. Remember, forever. I believed you. And then you left anyway. The words lanced through him. He remembered the night she spoke of the storm, the argument that escalated until it cracked. His mother's cruel words ringing in his ears, his cowardice in failing to defend her, and the sight of Everly collapsing in the rain after he walked away. He had replayed it 1,000 times, but this was no memory. This was a consequence. I can't erase that, Parker admitted, his voice breaking. But I can choose differently now. Everly looked at him, her eyes shimmering with something unspoken. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the weight of years between them. Her hand shifted against the wall, steadying herself as another ache rippled through her back. Parker instinctively moved closer, his hands half-reaching before he caught himself. Don't, she whispered, not unkindly, but firmly. Please, don't touch me like you still have the right. He froze, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Everly exhaled slowly as though steadying herself. If you want to prove you're serious, Parker, it won't be tonight. It won't be with money or promises whispered in a break room. It will be months from now when I'm exhausted, angry, and too tired to argue, and you're still there. It will be when she cries at 3 a.m., and you don't disappear into a boardroom instead. It will be consistent, not apologies. The silence that followed was dense, suffocating, and honest. Parker nodded once, a slight motion, but resolute. Then I'll prove it. Her eyes searched his face, as though testing for cracks for the man she had once loved, hidden beneath the billionaire's armor. For a long moment, neither moved. Then a voice called from the kitchen. Everly breaks over. She turned toward the sound, her hand lingering on her belly. She did not look back at him as she walked away, her braid swaying with each step. Parker remained in the corridor, the chill from the refrigeration unit seeping into his bones. He had everything, Tower's fortune, legacy, yet in that moment, he had nothing but an unspoken vow. He would not let her down again. Not this time. The waiting room was too bright. Fluorescent lights hummed above, bouncing off cream-colored walls, lined with faded posters about prenatal vitamins and the importance of hydration. Children's books lay scattered across the small table in the corner, their pages worn from countless little hands. Everly Brown sat stiffly in the molded plastic chair, one hand absently smoothing the fabric of her dress over her belly. The baby shifted inside her, an insistent flutter that made her press her lips together against both discomfort and wonder. She was used to this ritual by now. She checks in with the receptionist, fills out forms alone, and clutches her insurance card tighter than her dignity. Each visit reminded her of how life had split apart, leaving her to hold the pieces. Today was supposed to be routine, an ultrasound, a chance to hear her daughter's heartbeat again, an opportunity to remind herself that she wasn't just struggling, she was building. She exhaled slowly, trying to calm the storm beneath her ribs. And then she felt it. The room shifted. A presence entered, pulling the air taut. Everly didn't need to look up to know who it was. Her chest tightened. Parker Martinez. He stood in his immaculate navy suit at the reception desk, out of place among the weary mothers and restless toddlers. His voice, low, controlled, unmistakable, floated across the room as he spoke with the nurse. Heads turned. Whispers fluttered like restless wings. Everly closed her eyes for half a second. Of all the places, of all the moments, why here? He was already walking toward her when she opened them, his polished shoes muted against the linoleum. He stopped in front of her chair, filling the space between them. "Everly," he said softly. Her jaw clenched. "You shouldn't be here." He lowered himself into the empty chair beside her, his tailored suit bending against the cheap plastic. "I needed to be." She turned, her eyes flashing. "This isn't about you needing anything. This is about me, about her." She pressed her palm to her belly. "I know," he said. His voice was quiet, uncharacteristically unguarded. "That's why I'm here." Everly swallowed anger, warring with the sudden ache in her chest. "You think showing up at one appointment fixes 7 months of silence?" "No," Parker admitted. "It doesn't fix anything. But it's a start." Her laugh was bitter. "You sound like a man trying to negotiate a deal." His eyes met hers, steady. "This isn't a deal, Everly. This is a promise." Before she could respond, the nurse called her name. "Ms. Brown." Everly stood clutching her purse strap like a lifeline. She hesitated, her back straight, her pride taller than her frame. Then she walked toward the door, leaving Parker in the waiting room. But when she glanced over her shoulder, he was there following. The nurse raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Couples came in fractured shapes all the time. Inside the dim exam room, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. Everly slid onto the table, the crinkle of paper beneath her loud in the silence. She tried to focus on the ceiling tiles as the technician prepared the machine. And then Parker moved closer, standing just to her right, and not touching, not intruding, simply there. His presence wrapped around her like a shadow. The technician spread cool gel across Everly's skin, pressing the wand gently against her belly. And then it came, the rhythmic sound of a fast and strong heartbeat filling the room. Everly's breath caught. Every time she heard it, the same awe rose in her chest. This was her daughter, her miracle. She turned her head slightly, intending to keep the moment hers alone. But Parker's face undid her resolve. His eyes glistened, his lips parted, trembling with something unspoken. He pressed a fist against his mouth as though steadying himself, his composure cracking like glass. "That's her," he whispered, almost reverent. Everly blinked, startled by the rawness in his tone. She had expected arrogance, entitlement, and some attempt to reclaim control. But what she saw was a man undone. The image appeared on the monitor. Tiny fingers curled a profile in grayscale. Everly felt her chest ache as her daughter turned, as though shy of the attention. The technician printed the image and handed it to Everly, who took it gently, her fingertips trembling. Before she could tuck it away, Parker's voice broke the silence. "May I?" She looked at him, her instinct ready to refuse. But something in his face, earnest, fragile, almost pleading, stilled her tongue. Wordlessly, she handed him the photo. He took it carefully, holding it, as though it were more valuable than any contract he had ever signed. His thumb brushed the corner, and his eyes softened with something she hadn't seen in years. "She's beautiful," he murmured. Everly turned her face away, blinking against the sting in her eyes. She hated the part of her that still wanted to believe him and recognized the man she had once loved in the cracks of his armor. When the appointment ended, Everly dressed quickly, tucking the photo into her purse. Parker didn't speak as they walked back through the waiting room, but he stayed close, a silent sentinel. Outside, the city air hit sharply against her cheeks. She turned to him abruptly, her voice low but fierce. "Don't do that again." He frowned. "Do what show up uninvited. Walk into my life like you own pieces of it. You don't anymore." Parker's jaw flexed. "I don't want to own anything. I want to be here." She shook her head. "Being here once doesn't mean you'll stay. I don't need a billionaire swooping in for moments that make him feel noble. I need someone who shows up when it's messy or complicated, when I don't have the strength to keep standing." "I can be that," he said quietly. Her laugh cracked with pain. "You were supposed to be that, and you left." He flinched, but didn't retreat. "And I'll spend the rest of my life proving I won't again." Everly stared at him, her chest rising and falling with the weight of everything unsaid. She wanted to push him away, to slam the door on old wounds. And yet when she remembered the look on his face as he heard their daughter's heartbeat, something inside her wavered. But she couldn't give him that victory. Not yet. "Go home, Parker," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You don't belong in this part of my life anymore." She turned, walking toward the subway entrance at the corner, her stride quick, determined. Parker remained on the sidewalk, watching as she disappeared into the crowd. His chest ached with every step she took away from him. But the tiny grayscale profile photo in his pocket burned like a vow. He would not give up. Not on Everly. Not on their daughter. The weeks that followed the doctor's appointment unfolded like an unspoken war. Everly had thought Parker would vanish again. It was easier to let his promises dissolve in the night air, to chalk his appearance up to guilt, or some billionaire impulse to fix what could never be fixed. But he didn't vanish. Instead, Parker began to appear at the margins of her life. Not loud, not insistent, simply there. The first time she spotted him across the street from the diner, leaning against a sleek black car, his tie loosened as though he had come straight from some boardroom battlefield. He didn't enter. He didn't approach. He stood there until her shift ended, then walked half a block behind her to her apartment building. He never asked to be invited up. He only waited until she unlocked the door, then nodded once before leaving into the night. The second time, he was already inside the diner, tucked into a corner booth. He ordered black, untouched coffee and stayed through her entire shift. He didn't speak to her, didn't interrupt, and only left a generous tip for her coworker before disappearing. By the third time, the whispers had begun. "Who is that?" her colleague Marissa asked, balancing a tray of drinks. "The guy in the suit. He stares at you like you're the last star in the sky." Everly rolled her eyes, heat creeping up her neck. "He's nobody." But Parker wasn't nobody. He had never been. And despite every wall she tried to build, she couldn't ignore how her chest tightened each time she felt his gaze, steady, unwavering, almost penitential. One evening, after a grueling double shift, Everly trudged toward her building, her feet aching, her back sore. The bag of groceries she'd bought dug into her wrist. As she approached her stoop, she froze. The front steps were swept clean. The overflowing trash cans, usually left for days, had been taken to the curb, and on the landing sat a small basket: fresh fruit, bottled water, prenatal vitamins. Her stomach twisted. He was here. And indeed, when she looked down the block, Parker stood beneath a flickering streetlight, his silhouette sharp against the night. He didn't move toward her. He didn't speak. He only inclined his head, the faintest acknowledgement, before turning and walking away. Everly carried the basket upstairs, her pulse unsteady. Inside, tucked between the oranges and apples, was a folded note. No strings. Just take care of yourself. P. She nearly tore it in half, but instead, she set it on the counter, staring at the looping script until her vision blurred. 2 days later, the diner was slammed with weekend crowds. Everly balanced trays, refilled coffee, and forced smiles, while exhaustion gnawed at her. When the dinner rush peaked, she felt the familiar ache in her back, sharpen into something more insistent. She gripped the counter for support, her knuckles pale. Everly Marissa's voice was low, worried. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Everly lied, steadying herself. But before she could return to the floor, a presence moved beside her. Parker. He had no right to be behind the counter, but he was towering, his hand brushing hers as he reached for the tray she carried. "I'll take it," he said. Her eyes widened. "You can't!" But he already strode onto the floor, delivering plates with a calm that almost looked natural. Heads turned, murmurs spread, but Parker didn't care. He precisely placed each order, then returned to the counter, his suit jacket catching the fluorescent light. Everly glared. "You can't just play server." He met her gaze steadily. "You needed help." Her chest tightened, fury and something far more fragile colliding. "This isn't your world, Parker." His reply was quiet. "Then let me carry the edges of it." She opened her mouth, but before words came, another contraction of pain rippled through her lower back. Parker noticed instantly. His hand twitched toward her arm, but stopped short, hovering in the space between them. Everly turned away, unwilling to let him see the weakness and admit how much relief it brought to not stand alone in that moment. Days blurred into a strange rhythm. Parker's presence wove through her routines, not dominating, but lingering like a shadow. When her landlord threatened to shut off hot water, the notice vanished, replaced by a paid-in-full receipt. When the lock on her front door jammed, a locksmith appeared the next morning, saying the work had already been arranged. Everly's fury burned at each intrusion. She didn't want to be a charity project. She didn't want to be reminded of her dependence on a man who had once abandoned her. Yet beneath the anger was an unsettling truth. She wasn't afraid anymore, not of walking home late, broken locks, or small disasters piling too high. Because he was there. Always there. One night, exhaustion pressed heavily as Everly climbed the stairs to her apartment. The hallway was dim, the hum of a broken light buzzing above. She reached her door and froze. Leaning against the wall beside her apartment, Parker stood with his jacket draped over one arm, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked almost ordinary like that, less like Manhattan's untouchable billionaire, and more like the man she had once woken up beside on Sunday mornings. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharper than intended. His eyes softened. "Making sure you got home safe. I don't need a bodyguard." "You don't," he agreed, "but I needed to see it with my own eyes." The silence stretched thick with everything they weren't saying. Finally, she sighed, sliding her key into the lock. "Good night, Parker." He hesitated, then asked quietly, "Can I walk you to your appointment tomorrow? Just walk." Nothing more. Her hand stilled on the doorknob. She should say no. She wanted to say no, but the words tangled in her throat, refusing to emerge. Instead, she pushed the door open and stepped inside, leaving him silent. But the next morning, when she exited the building, Parker was there, waiting. Not inside a car, not flanked by bodyguards, just him, leaning against the iron railing with his hair damp from the early rain. He didn't speak as they walked side by side to the clinic. He didn't push, didn't demand, only matched her pace, step for step, as though time had slowed to keep them aligned. For the first time in months, Everly's heart betrayed her. It whispered of what might still be possible. Later, as she lay awake in her small apartment, Everly pressed her hands over her belly and tried to smother the dangerous warmth that had crept into her chest. Parker's gestures, quiet, relentless, unasked for, were becoming threads in the fabric of her days. She had sworn she would never let him close again. Yet here he was, not asking for forgiveness, not demanding love, simply refusing to leave. And the terrifying truth was this: a part of her didn't want him to. Parker had once taken pride in the view from the 35th floor. Manhattan glittered below like a restless ocean of lights, every tower a testament to the empire he had inherited and then multiplied. The Martinez name gleamed on more than one of those rooftops, an empire of glass and steel stretching toward infinity. But tonight, the city's brilliance felt suffocating. He stood at the head of the polished conference table, hands braced against the superb mahogany as 3 pairs of eyes burned into him from across the room. His mother was the first to speak. Eleanor Martinez, elegant even in her 60s, with her pearl necklace gleaming against a silk blouse, had always carried authority sharper than any contract. "This ends now," she said, her voice quiet but edged like a blade. Parker didn't lift his gaze from the skyline. "I don't know what you mean." "You do," she replied, her eyes narrowing. "You've been seen at diners in a neighborhood with no place in our world following a woman who will drag you down with her. She has a name," Parker said evenly. "Everly." Across the table, his younger brother Thomas let out a bitter laugh. "So it's true. You're slumming it with some server. Do you have any idea what the board is whispering? They think you've lost your mind." Parker turned his gaze on him, cold and sharp. "Be careful." Thomas leaned back in his chair, smirking. "I'm just saying what everyone else is. This girl, whoever she is, she's not from our world. She's not one of us. And the longer you drag this out, the more unstable you look." Eleanor's hand tightened around her glass of water. "This family cannot afford scandal, Parker. We've worked too hard. Your father built this legacy brick by brick, and now you risk tarnishing it for what? Guilt, infatuation." At last, Parker straightened his shoulders, rigid. His gaze swept the room, landing first on his mother, then on his brother, then on the silent board member seated in the corner. "This isn't about guilt or infatuation," he said. His voice was calm, but his chest thundered. "This is about a child. My child." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas's smirk faltered. Eleanor's fingers froze against the stem of her glass. Even the board member shifted, eyes widening in shock. Eleanor's voice broke the silence. "A child." Parker's throat tightened, but he didn't waver. "Yes, she's pregnant with my daughter." The word daughter lingered in the air like smoke. Eleanor's eyes closed briefly, as though absorbing a blow. "Parker," she whispered, "do you understand what this means? The press will devour it. They will crucify her, and you. They will paint her as a gold digger, a manipulator." "She's none of those things," Parker cut in, his voice sharp with rare heat. "She's strong. She's independent. And she wanted nothing from me. She raised this child on her own for months before I even knew." Thomas scoffed. "And you believe that?" Parker's jaw flexed. "I don't need to believe. I know." The board member cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Martinez, forgive me, but this development could have consequences. Investors, partners, the media, they won't take kindly to what?" Parker's voice thundered across the table. "To a man standing by the mother of his child. To a man daring to love outside the narrow box you built for him." His words echoed against the high ceilings, rattling even his composure. Eleanor's eyes glistened, but her voice remained steel. Parker, you are not a man alone. You carry a name, a dynasty. Your choices are not yours alone to make. For a moment, he faltered. The weight of her words pressed against the years of expectation he had carried since boyhood. The heir, the figurehead, the son expected to guard a legacy older than his desires. But then, Everly's face rose in his mind, the way her hand had rested protectively over her belly, the sound of their daughter's heartbeat, filling the exam room, the shadows under her eyes when she believed no one was watching. And something inside him shifted. I carried your name long enough, he said softly. But my daughter will not grow up believing love is something you trade for approval. Not from this family. Not from anyone. The silence was colder this time, more dangerous. Eleanor's lips parted, but no words came. Thomas shook his head, muttering curses under his breath. The board members scribbled notes furiously, already calculating the fallout. Parker turned away from them toward the skyline. Manhattan stretched endlessly glittering and hollow. And for the first time he realized the empire meant nothing if it required him to sacrifice the only thing that had ever felt real. Later that night, Parker sat in the back of his car, the city sliding past in streaks of neon and rain. His phone buzzed with messages, his mother, brother, and board. He ignored them all. Instead, he found himself driving not toward his penthouse, but toward the diner. The neon sign flickered against the damp street as he stepped out, the scent of frying oil and fresh coffee greeting him. Inside, Everly moved between tables, her smile practiced, but her steps heavy. When she saw him, her expression froze. Not tonight, Parker, she said, weary, already turning away. But he caught her wrist gently, not forcefully, not demanding. Just enough to anchor her. Everly, he said, his voice quiet but resolute. I told them about us. About her. She stilled. Slowly she turned back to him, searching his face for any trace of a lie. You told them, my family, the board, everyone who thinks they own me. Her brows furrowed suspicion, lacing her exhaustion. And what did they say? That I'm destroying myself. His lips curved faintly, humorless. But for once, I don't care. Everly's breath hitched, her chest tightening. She wanted to believe him and let the warmth unfurl in her ribs, but her wounds were still raw. Words are easy, Parker, she whispered. They're easy in boardrooms, in bedrooms, in diners. But when it gets hard, when the world turns cruel, will you still stand there? Or will you leave again? Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated herself for the vulnerability and the way her eyes stung with unshed tears. Parker's gaze softened. He released her wrist slowly, deliberately, as though to show he had no intention of holding her against her will. I can't rewrite the past, he said, his voice low, but I can fight for the future, for you, for her. And then, without waiting for her reply, he stepped back, giving her space, leaving his words to linger between them, like a vow carved into the night air. Everly stood frozen, her heart pounding, her mind a whirl of fear and longing. She wanted to run from him, to shield herself and her daughter from the storm he carried with him. But when she glanced at the reflection in the diner's glass, she saw him outside, standing in the rain, waiting again. Not demanding, not leaving, waiting. And for the first time, Everly realized the lines had been drawn, not just between Parker and his family, but between the man he once was and the man he was becoming. And somewhere deep inside her, a seed of possibility stirred. The first article appeared on a Wednesday morning. Everly had woken early, padding barefoot into her small kitchen, her robe wrapped tight against the chill. The kettle whistled softly, steam curling toward the cracked ceiling when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Marissa. Don't go online. Everly frowned, confusion threading her exhaustion. She clicked the link Marissa had attached anyway. Her breath caught. A photograph was on the glowing screen under the bold, merciless headline. Grainy, taken at night, but unmistakable. Parker Martinez, heir to billions, standing under a streetlight. And beside him, her. Everly, her hair pulled into a messy bun, her belly rounding under the soft fabric of her coat. Billionaire's secret scandal mystery woman, carrying Martinez heir. Her stomach lurched, bile rising in her throat. She scrolled, but the words blurred. Waitress, unknown background. Possible, gold digger. Speculation spun wild, each sentence cutting deeper than the last. When she dropped the phone onto the counter, her hands were trembling. The kettle shrieked. Everly turned it off, her chest rising and falling in jagged breaths. This was the nightmare she'd sworn she'd never face. Her private world ripped wide open, her name and body dissected by strangers who saw her as nothing but a headline. The diner was worse. By noon, reporters had crowded the sidewalk, their cameras flashing each time the door opened. Inside, whispers snaked from booth to booth. Regulars stared openly, some with sympathy, others with judgment, sharpened by curiosity. Marissa hugged her tightly in the back hallway. "You don't have to stay," she murmured. "I'll cover your shifts." But Everly shook her head. "If I run now, they'll eat me alive. I need normal. I need..." Her voice cracked. "I need to hold on to something real." So she tied on her apron, walked onto the floor, and served coffee to people who no longer saw her as Everly Brown, the woman who laughed at silly jokes and carried trays with practiced ease. They saw Parker's scandal, Parker's secret, and Parker himself. He appeared that evening, as if conjured by her fraying strength. The cameras outside erupted when his sleek car pulled to the curb. He ignored them, stepping into the diner with a storm in his eyes. The chatter hushed instantly. Every gaze turned, waiting. Everly's heart hammered. "Parker, don't!" But he crossed the floor, unbothered by the stares, and stopped before her. For a moment, the entire diner held its breath. "Everly," he said, his voice carrying low but steady. "Come with me." Her throat tightened. "This is my life, Parker. My world. You don't get to barge in, and I'm not here to take it from you." His gaze softened. "I'm here to shield it." The silence was so thick it felt alive. Then gently, he held out his hand. The cameras outside pressed against the glass. The whispers inside swelled. Everly stared at him, at the hand that had once built empires and broken her heart. And for the briefest moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to take it. But then reality crashed in the articles, the stares, the venom in every speculative word. Her hand stayed at her side. "I can't," she whispered. A flicker of pain crossed his face. He dropped his hand, but didn't retreat. "Then I'll stand here until you can." And he did. He sat in the corner booth, ordered nothing, and waited while she worked his presence both unbearable and grounding. By the weekend, the storm had swelled into a hurricane. Headlines multiplied. Martinez heiress on the way. Who is Everly Brown billionaire? Betrayal or true love? Photographers trailed her to the grocery store, their lenses pointed like weapons. Neighbors whispered in the hallways. Even at the clinic, she felt eyes lingering too long. Sympathy edged with curiosity. Each day chipped at her resolve. One night, exhausted and raw, she returned home to find Parker sitting on the stoop of her building. His tie was loosened, his hair damp from the misty rain. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice frayed. "Making sure you're safe," he said. "Safe?" Her laugh was brittle. "From what, Parker?" "From your world that won't leave me alone. From cameras shoved in my face. From your family painting me as some schemer after your money." He flinched but didn't look away. "I can't stop them from talking, but I can make sure they don't touch you." Her chest heaved, fury and grief colliding. This isn't a boardroom you can control with contracts and lawyers. This is my life, and you've dragged me into a fire I never wanted. His voice broke, then quiet, but unshakable, because I can't stand outside your life anymore. Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, she saw not the billionaire, not the scandal, but the man who had pressed a trembling hand to her belly at the doctor's office, eyes shining with awe. And she hated how much her heart ached for him. The breaking point came the following week. Everly was leaving the clinic after a routine checkup when the swarm descended. Microphones shoved toward her, voices clamoring. Everly, are you carrying the Martinez heir? Are you planning to marry him? Was this pregnancy an accident or a strategy? Flashes blinded her. Panic clawed up her throat. She stumbled, shielding her belly, her breath short and shallow. Then a hand caught hers. Parker. He pushed through the crowd with a ferocity she'd never seen, his arm wrapped around her protectively, his glare enough to cut through the frenzy. Back off, he growled, his voice like thunder. The reporters hesitated, but the cameras still flashed, capturing every moment, the billionaire shielding the woman at the center of the scandal. When they finally reached his car, Everly collapsed into the seat, her body trembling. Parker slid in beside her, his jaw tight, his hand still gripping hers as though he couldn't let go. Her voice was a whisper. I can't do this, Parker. I can't live under a spotlight that tears me apart. He turned to her, then his eyes raw, unguarded. Then let me take the spotlight. Let them burn me instead. But don't shut me out. Tears stung her eyes. She wanted to tell him it was impossible, that the gap between their worlds was too wide, too merciless. But when she looked at him, saw the storm in his eyes, saw how his hand cradled hers, as though she were the most fragile, precious thing in the world, something inside her wavered. She didn't feel entirely alone for the first time since the scandal began. That night, as the city buzzed outside, Everly sat in her dim apartment, Parker's jacket draped over her shoulders. She could still smell the faint trace of his cologne, still feel the warmth of his hand against hers. The world had turned her into a headline, a scandal, a target. But to him, at least, in the quiet moments when no cameras intruded, she was something else. And against her will, against her fear, she found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, she was still allowed to be. The storm outside Everly's apartment was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside Parker's world. For days, Parker had stood unwavering at her side, absorbing the fury of tabloids, shielding her from cameras, refusing to let her drown. But empires, unlike hearts, could not be guarded by sheer will. And Parker's empire had begun to tremble. The first blow came from the boardroom. Parker entered Martinez Global's headquarters one morning, jaw tight, his mind still haunted by the image of Everly, flinching under the crush of paparazzi. The mirrored walls reflected his figure at him, crisp suit, steel blue eyes, every inch the billionaire heir who should have had the world under his thumb. But when the board meeting began, the illusion cracked. Your personal life has become a liability, an older board member snapped, sliding a newspaper across the mahogany table. The headline screamed, Martinez Dynasty in Jeopardy, heir's reckless affair threatens global interests. Parker barely glanced at it. My personal life is not on the agenda. On the contrary, another chimed in, voice sharp as glass. It is the agenda. Our partners are skittish. Investors are calling. A scandal of this magnitude doesn't vanish quietly. Parker leaned back, his fingers steepled. Our numbers are steady. Quarterly reports. Numbers aren't steady when perception isn't the first cut in. Perception is everything, Parker. And right now you've aligned this company's reputation with a waitress of questionable background carrying a child you haven't even formally acknowledged. The words struck like a blade. Parker's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice even. Everly Brown is not a liability. She is—" He stopped himself. The words hovered unsaid. "She is nothing to this company," the man finished coldly. The vote followed wasn't an outright revolt, but it was close enough. The board demanded Parker step back from day-to-day leadership until the scandal subsided. Temporary. Just optics. But Parker knew better. In business, temporary was another word for the beginning of the end. That evening, he found Everly on the fire escape outside her apartment. She sat with her knees pulled close, the city lights painting her profile in gold and shadow. She looked up when he joined her, and immediately she knew. "They went after you," she whispered. He didn't answer, not directly. He rested his hands on the railing, the muscles in his arms taut, his expression unreadable. "You're losing everything," she pressed, her voice breaking. "Because of me." "Not because of you," he said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "Because I won't let them erase you." Her chest tightened. "Parker, they think you're the crack in my armor." His gaze shifted toward the horizon, fierce, almost defiant. "They're wrong. You're the reason I'm still standing." Her throat constricted. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let his words anchor her. But doubt gnawed at the edges of her heart. What if his empire collapsed entirely? What if she wasn't his salvation, but his downfall? The second blow came from the press. An anonymous leak surfaced photographs of Everly's apartment, invasive shots of her walking home, even a grainy image of her at the clinic. The accompanying article was venomous accusations that she was manipulating Parker, that the pregnancy was a calculated trap. Everly read it in the quiet of her room, tears streaking down her cheeks. Every insecurity, every fear she had fought to bury was laid bare for strangers to feast on. When Parker arrived that night, she shoved the paper into his hands, her voice shaking. "This is what your world does to me, to us." His jaw tightened as he read fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. "I'll find who leaked this." "It won't matter," she whispered. "There will always be another story, another picture, another knife." He reached for her then, but she stepped back, wrapping her arms protectively around her belly. "Everly, you can fight your board, your rivals, your headlines," she said, her voice trembling. "But how do I fight the world when it's telling me I don't belong in yours?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Parker's eyes searched hers, raw and desperate, but she couldn't hold his gaze. The third blow came from his family. One Sunday afternoon, Parker was summoned to the Martinez estate. His mother, Elena, presided over the parlor with her usual icy elegance. "You've humiliated this family," she said without preamble. Parker remained standing, his posture rigid. "I've made my choices. You've made mistakes." Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "Mistakes we will correct. The girl will take a settlement, disappear quietly. We'll arrange everything." Parker's jaw clenched. "She's not taking a settlement. She's carrying my child. She is using your child. She is not." His voice cracked, anger and pain colliding. "You don't know her. You don't know anything." Elena's gaze sharpened, but beneath the steel there was something almost vulnerable. "I know what this family has built, and I know what it takes to keep it standing. If you continue down this path, Parker, you won't just lose your company. You'll lose everything your father left you." He swallowed hard. For a flicker of a moment, the weight of legacy pressed against his chest like a crushing stone. But then he remembered Everly's hand trembling in his, her whispered fears, how she had stood alone in the face of a world determined to break her. He said softly, "If I have to choose, then I choose her." His mother's expression didn't change, but her silence was louder than any scream. Parker carried the day's shadows when he returned to Everly that night. She was curled on the couch, her hair loose, her eyes tired from tears. He sat beside her close, but not touching. "They want to buy you off," he admitted. "Erase you." Her breath caught. "And what did you say? I said no." The room was filled with silence. Heavy. Fragile. "Parker," she whispered. "You can't keep bleeding for me. You'll lose everything." He turned to her, then his eyes burning with something that frightened her more than fury devotion. "If everything I've built can't survive loving you," he said quietly, "then maybe it was never worth building." Her heart clenched, torn between longing and fear, because for the first time she realized this wasn't just about surviving a scandal. It was about rewriting the entire story of who Parker Martinez was and who she was willing to become beside him. But outside their fragile cocoon, enemies were circling. Rivals whispered in boardrooms. Politicians eyed the headlines hungrily. And somewhere someone was orchestrating the leaks, feeding the storm, waiting for the moment Parker's empire would finally shatter. Everly could feel it like thunder rolling in the distance. And though Parker's hand was steady when it found hers, she couldn't help but wonder, were they standing at the beginning of a new life together, or on the edge of a ruin that would consume them both? The rain that night was relentless. Manhattan's skyline blurred into streaks of silver and shadow, as if the city was holding its breath. Everly sat curled on Parker's leather sofa, one hand absently cradling her belly, her other tracing the rim of a teacup gone cold. She had grown used to the quiet strength of Parker's presence, his hand steady on her back, his gaze a shield against the world's cruelty. But tonight, even Parker's strength felt fragile, because tonight the enemy finally had a face. It was after midnight when Parker returned from the emergency board meeting. His suit was damp from the storm, his hair clinging to his forehead. He dropped his briefcase onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. Everly rose immediately. "What happened?" He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw raw exhaustion etched into the lines of his face. "It's Caleb." Her brow furrowed. Caleb Foster Parker nodded, bitterness lacing the name. "My father's oldest rival. He's been orchestrating everything, the leaks, the headlines, the pressure on the board. He wants Martinez Global vulnerable. And I made it easy for him." Everly stepped closer, her voice soft. "You didn't make it easy. You made a choice." Parker's eyes flickered to her belly, then back to her. "A choice he's determined to punish me for. And he won't stop until he takes everything. The company, the estate, us." The following evening, Parker and Everly walked into the ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, where Caleb Foster had orchestrated his grand move. The gala glittered with Manhattan's elite politicians, CEOs, journalists, all circling like sharks, drawn by the scent of blood. At the center, Caleb waited, silver-haired, sharp-suited, with a smile that sliced rather than soothed. "Parker," Caleb drawled, as they approached, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. "And Miss Brown, what a surprising delight." Everly felt every eye in the room crawl over her like judgment. She stood straighter, refusing to shrink beneath their gaze. "You've made quite the spectacle," Caleb continued, swirling his glass of scotch. "Headlines, scandals, shareholder panic. Your father must be spinning in his grave." Parker's jaw tightened. "Say what you came to say, Caleb." Caleb's smile widened. "Sell. Step down before you drag what's left of Martinez Global into the gutter. You'll keep your fortune, penthouse, even your dignity if you walk away now. And if I don't." Parker's voice was low, dangerous. "Then I'll dismantle you piece by piece," Caleb replied smoothly. "And the world will watch as the empire collapses. All because you couldn't separate your indulgences from your professional obligations." His gaze flicked to Everly, cruel and deliberate. "Some mistakes aren't worth the cost, son." Everly's heart clenched, but Parker's hand found hers, grounding her. He lifted his chin, eyes locked on Caleb. "She's not a mistake," he said, each word deliberate. "She's the only thing in my life that isn't one." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Gasps echoed. And just like that, the line was drawn. The days that followed were brutal. Caleb launched a smear campaign that painted Everly as a gold digger, Parker as reckless, and their unborn child as nothing but a scandal. Contracts dissolved. Partnerships vanished. The stock plummeted. Everly begged Parker to let her leave, to disappear, so his empire could breathe again. But Parker refused. "I won't lose you to save numbers on a screen," he told her one night as they sat on the floor of her apartment surrounded by half-eaten takeout containers. His voice cracked, but his conviction didn't. "I've built towers of steel and glass. Let them fall. I'd rather make a life with you from nothing than live a gilded lie without you." Everly's eyes burned with tears. In that moment, she realized what terrified her wasn't losing him to the world. It was losing herself to her fear. She pressed her forehead against his. "Then we fight. Together." The fight was not glamorous. It was nights of legal battles, mornings of harsh headlines, afternoons of whispered betrayals. It was Parker stepping into boardrooms with enemies waiting, Everly walking through crowds of flashing cameras with her chin high. It was exhaustion and resolve, heartbreak and defiance. And then, against all odds, something shifted. Investors who had once doubted Parker began to notice his unflinching resolve. Journalists who had painted Everly as a scandal began to see her dignity, strength, and how she refused to crumble beneath the weight of judgment. Slowly, the narrative began to turn, not from scandal to perfection, but from scandal to something far more powerful: survival. Months later, Everly stood in the gardens of the Martinez estate, her belly round her hands, resting gently over new life. The air was thick with the scent of roses, and for once, silence held peace rather than threat. Parker came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "They're calling for another vote," he murmured. "The board wants me back. They've realized Caleb doesn't build, he only destroys." Everly turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. "And what do you want?" He was quiet for a long moment, then whispered, "I want this. You. Our family. The rest. It can wait." Her heart swelled, because in the end, it wasn't the board, Caleb, or the empire that defined Parker. It was the choice he had made again and again to love her in a world that told him not to. When their child finally came, a daughter, her skin kissed with the warmth of Everly's heritage, and her eyes, the same piercing blue as Parker's, the storm finally broke. Holding the tiny bundle in his arms, Parker felt the weight of legacy, empire, and rivalry dissolve into irrelevance. Caleb could have his headlines. The board could have its politics. The world could judge. This moment belonged only to them. Everly leaned against the hospital bed, tears slipping down her cheeks as she whispered, "She's perfect." Parker kissed her damp curls, his voice breaking. "No, you are." And in that fragile, luminous moment, love wasn't a battlefield. It wasn't a scandal. It was simply theirs. As the months passed, Parker rebuilt what Caleb had tried to destroy. Not with arrogance, but with transparency. Not as the heir who ruled with an iron fist, but as the man who had been broken, who had chosen love and risen stronger because of it. And Everly, once just a waitress, the world dismissed, became his anchor partner, the quiet strength the empire never saw coming. Together they weren't untouchable. They were unbreakable. Because love, when chosen against all odds, wasn't weakness. It was the sharpest weapon of all. And so their story did not end in ruin or fairy tale perfection, but in something truer, A life built in the wreckage, a love carved out of storms. For every headline, every betrayal, every cruel whisper, there was a hand held tighter, a promise spoken, softer, a life lived, braver. And somewhere beyond the city's noise, in the quiet of their daughter's laughter, Parker and Everly discovered that forever wasn't a castle on a hill. Forever was this. If you've been swept up in Parker and Everly's journey, the scandal, the storms, the love that refused to die, make sure you like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and follow the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of love, betrayal, and redemption. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life.